Okay, now we've confirmed that we're getting our users back from the API. Let's complete our walking skeleton part of this and actually display the users in our app. That was our original goal, was to have some data in a database that we then fetch into our client application and then display it in our browser. Seems like we've done quite a lot of work to get here to achieve not very much, but we have set up two big parts of our application, and we're going to display the users in the app right now. So let's go back to VS Code and see how we do this. So what we do know is that we have our users property in our app component, and this is assigned the response that we get back from our API and is populated in this property inside our class. What we also know is that we could use interpolation to get any properties from our class components, our Angular components, and use that to display something in our app component. So what we're going to do is we'll just add a UL. We'll keep things nice and simple at this stage, just so that we can understand the basics of what's going on. And then what we'll do is add some list items. Now what we want to do here is we want to loop through each of those users and just display their details in the list items themselves. So what we can do when we're looping over content in Angular is we use a structural directive. Structural directives are something that modifies the domain object model in our HTML in some way. Now our list items do not exist without users, so they don't even form part of the domain object model until this is executed. So these are referred to as structural directives. And we're going to use the ng4. And we say equals, and then we can add our expression inside here. And our expression is to say let user of users. And notice that we get some IntelliSense here. It recognizes the different properties that are available inside our component, and we can specify that we want the users. And we don't see any errors here. If we change the S to a Z, then what should happen is that it gets a red underline, but nothing happened until I accidentally shifted down a line there. So we should see some kind of safety if we make a spelling mistake in there. So I'm going to change it back to users, and notice the positioning of where we add this expression. We've got our list item tag, the opening tag. This is where the ng4 needs to go. It doesn't go inside the list items. It very specifically has to go before the closing angle bracket here. Now, once we have this in place, what we can use then is interpolation. So we'll add the curly brackets, and what we'll do is we'll just display user.id followed by a dash, and then we'll say user.username. And if we go and take a look at our browser, well, that's kind of disappointing. We can see the ID, but for some reason we're not getting the username back. Now feel free to pause the video here and investigate why you think this could be at this point, but I'm going to show you anyway. So once again, anytime we get something unexpected, the first response that we're going to do is open up the console. You almost need to make this like a reflex. Whenever you see something that you don't expect on a page, your right arm should be going to the right mouse button and clicking on the inspect. And let's take a look at the console. Well, we don't see any errors in the console. So something's gone wrong, but we're not seeing anything obvious. So if we take a look at the network tab, and let's just refresh the page again to see what we're getting back from our API, then what we can see here is that our usernames are not all in lowercase. They're user, capital N, and then name. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the properties in Angular are case sensitive. If you've got a property coming down from your API spelt in camel case, and then you try to access it in lowercase, it's not going to recognize it. It's going to see it as two different things. Even though you, as a human, recognize that, yep, we meant to get the username, the Angular compiler is not human. It's very strict on casing. So if we want to display the usernames, then obviously we need to specify username in camel case there. And if we go back and take a look at our browser, we can now see our three users populated inside our application. And that is what we wanted to achieve. We've got our walking skeleton, but we don't have the architecture quite that we want yet. We've still got a couple of tasks before we finish this section. And the next task we'll look at is installing the styling framework we're going to use. Okay, it's time to look at adding some styling framework into our application, and the one that we're going to use is Bootstrap. And if you've never used Bootstrap before, then this is going to allow us to lay out things on our page easily by using classes that are provided by Bootstrap, and it saves us writing a significant amount of CSS. They've written the CSS for us to use, and we simply use their classes to lay things out on our page. Now currently the latest version of Bootstrap is on 5.1.3 at the time of re-recording this lesson, which is in November 2021. Now I wrote the code based on Bootstrap 4, and there are some breaking changes in Bootstrap 5. So what we'll do in this course is we'll use version 4, but at the end we'll make the code changes necessary to update to Bootstrap 5 if you want to. It's not compulsory, and there really isn't that much to gain by doing so. One of the big things actually they changed in version 5, if we take a look at the version 4 documentation, and this is the version that we're going to be installing, but if we take a look at JavaScript and how certain components in Bootstrap are provided with their functionality, then the JavaScript that's provided by Bootstrap is built on top of jQuery. Now I'm often asked, is it okay to install jQuery in an Angular project? And there's no law against it. Technically it does work most of the time. But the only thing to bear in mind is that Angular includes change detection. When something changes in the domain object model or document object model, then Angular adds its own change tracking to it. jQuery is also a library that manipulates the document object model, but Angular is not aware of when jQuery is making an update. So it's something to bear in mind. Yes, you can get away with it if there's a particular library that you want to add some flashiness to your application. It's probably going to be okay, but it's not normally recommended. And if you're to ask that question on something like Stack Overflow, typically most people would say, no, don't do it, because you'll mess with Angular's change tracking. So we still need to provide functionality to our components, but we're not going to use the Bootstrap provided JavaScript to do so. What we are going to use is Angular Bootstrap. And this is NGX Bootstrap, and this provides wrappers for the different Bootstrap components and provides functionality via Angular components instead of using the Bootstrap JavaScript directly. Now, things have changed in Bootstrap version 5, and if I go back home and go to the version 5 documentation and take a look at JavaScript, there's no mention of jQuery anymore. They have actually removed it from their packages, but it would still have the same problem because the JavaScript they'll be using will still be manipulating the DOM, and even though it doesn't have jQuery, it will probably mess with Angular change tracking. So it's better to use Angular Bootstrap. And if we go and take a look at the documentation for NGX Bootstrap, which we are going to be installing, and click Get Started, then by default at the moment they're using version 4 of Bootstrap, but that does not mean you cannot use version 5. They are now compatible with these different versions of Bootstrap. But I do want to show you the version information inside here, and if I just scroll down this page, then we'll see the compatibility and what this is currently compatible with. Now notice the version of Angular that it's compatible with: version 7.1.0, 11 and 12, version 7, 11 and 12, version 6, 9 and 10. No mention of Angular 13, which is available in November 2021. It normally takes them a few months to make a version that's compatible with the latest version of Angular. So for that reason, we're sticking with Angular 12 on this course, and if Angular version 14 has been released, then Angular 13 would be fine, and you could come into the compatibility and see what is working. And notice on version 7.1.0, we can use any of these versions of Bootstrap with NGX Bootstrap. We can use version 5, we can use version 4 or version 3. But in this particular version of NGX Bootstrap, it's going to default to installing Bootstrap 4. When it comes to version 8 of this, then they will be defaulting to version 5. Now we want to be on version 4 because that's the way the code was written in this course, and we're deferring the update to Bootstrap 5 until the end of the course, and just spending the 10 minutes or so that it takes to update the different classes to use Bootstrap 5. So I'm going to ask you to install Bootstrap 4 so that you don't run into styling problems, and ask you to wait until we get to the end, and then we'll update our code to use Bootstrap 5. It won't take long, and it's small changes in many different components in Bootstrap 5, but the end result is still exactly the same. So there's no advantage to using Bootstrap 5 for this course, is what I'm saying. So do stick with Bootstrap 4. So how do we go and install this? Well, let's scroll up to the documentation, and there's two different ways of doing this, and we're going to use ng-add ngx bootstrap, and this does several things inside our project. It's going to go and get Bootstrap. It's also going to add the style sheets into our Angular JSON file, and it's going to add something to our app module that we need to run this particular package. Now, if we had gone ahead and installed Angular version 13, then this command will not work, because the package authors need to update this package to work with Angular schematics in version 13. And if you were on Angular version 13, then you would need to follow the install in the manual way and do everything it says inside here. But we're doing it differently. We're going to go for the Angular CLI way, but bear in mind the compatibility. This is only going to work if we're inside the compatible options that they mention here. So we're going to go and grab this command, the ng-add ngx bootstrap, so that we can use Angular schematics to do so. And we'll head back to VS Code and we'll go ahead and install this. So we'll just open up a separate tab inside here. We need to be inside our client folder when we're using these commands. So I'm going to press return and see what happens. And it's asking us if we'd like to proceed with the installation of ngx bootstrap 7.1.0. I'm going to say yes. And this is going to go ahead and install a package that we need. And let's take a look at what it's done. It's been successful because we're using Angular 12 and it's compatible with Angular 12. It's added Bootstrap, it's added ngx bootstrap to our package.json, and it's also updated angular.json, and it's updated the app module.ts. So first of all, let's take a look at the package.json and see what we got with this installation. And we can see that it's installed Bootstrap version 4.5.3. and it's got ngx bootstrap 7.1.0. So that was one of the changes it made. Let's take a look at the angular.json file, which is in the root of our client project. And inside here, let's take a look down at the changes. And in our styles array here, we can see that it's added ngx bootstrap date picker CSS, and also it's added the style sheet for Bootstrap itself as well. That's what we want to see, and it's made one other change that I'll mention inside our app module components, and it's added the browser animations module, which it needs for some of the functionality of the components that we'll make use of. And there's another thing that we need as well. Alongside Bootstrap, we also want some icons or an icon set, and we're going to use Font Awesome for that. So we'll open up the terminal once again, and we're going to say npm install font-awesome and press return. And this goes ahead and installs this package, and we'll make use of this a bit later on. Let's go back to our client. We will need to restart our application because we've got some changes in our Angular configuration file, the angular.json. We will need to stop and restart our application so that it picks up those changes. So I'll stop it and rerun ngserve. And once the application's restarted, we should be able to go across to our client, and a subtle change, but we can see that the font has changed inside our application here. But at least it confirms that Bootstrap has been installed and it's picking up the styles. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at installing a self-signed certificate so that we can run our client application over HTTPS. And there's a version of that lesson for Windows and a separate version for Mac. So if you're on Windows, please skip the next lesson because that's Mac specific. And if you're on a Mac, please watch the next one and skip the one after, so that we can get that installed and enabled in our application. Okay, what we're going to run through now is setting up our Angular application to use SSL. This lesson is very specifically for Mac, I've created a different lesson for Windows, so please skip this lesson if you're using Windows. There's a lesson to-do list on Windows coming up next. This is just for those users that are using Mac OS X. So I'm presuming because you're watching this now that you're on a Mac, and what we want to do is open up the student assets folder. But if you don't have this, this is attached as a resource in lesson 3, so please grab this if you don't have this available. And what we want to do is take a look inside the Generate Trusted SSL folder. Now there's a couple of certificates here, or there's a certificate and a key for that certificate called server CRT and server.key. Now these are certificates that I've generated using this script and this configuration. You can go and take a look at this if you want. You can generate your own SSL certificates using this little script, but it does rely on using OpenSSL, so do make sure you have that available before attempting to use this script. But for your convenience, I've got a couple of certificates here, or a certificate here, that we can use to run our application securely. And we've also got some instructions here about what we need to do to trust this certificate that we have inside this folder. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy these two files, and what we want to do is inside our client application we want to create a new folder and call it SSL, and then what we want to do is open this in Finder, and inside this folder we're just going to paste these two items inside there. And on our instructions it tells us exactly what we need to do here. So we need to double click on the certificate, the CRT file. So let's do that first of all. And it's going to ask us to select our desired keychain. The login one should be fine. And then we can just go and add the certificates. And you should see in your keychain that should have opened automatically. If you search for localhost, then you should see a certificate with an expiry of the 2nd of September 2040. I've given the certificate a 20-year lifespan in the hope that you'd have finished this development of this application before that particular year. I should certainly hope so. And what we want to do then is on this certificate, just double click it, expand the trust, and select the option to always trust when using this certificate. And if we expand the trust, then when using this certificate we want to say always trust, and then we can close this window. And we're making changes, so you're going to need to use whatever method of authentication to accept that, and then we can close everything and we're good to go. So what we need to do next is tell Angular that we want to use these SSL certificate and run our application over HTTPS. So in order to do that, we need to go to our angular.json file and locate the section called serve on line 65 in my case, and then we need to supply this with some options. So inside the options area we're going to specify the SSL cert, and we're going to specify /SSL/server.crt, and then in the next line we're going to say SSL key is /SSL/server.key, and then we can specify SSL and set this to true, which will mean that our application then runs off HTTPS. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal, make sure we've got everything started. I do have my .NET terminal stopped at the moment, so I'm going to run that. I'm going to also run the Angular application, so I'm just going to say ngserve and press return. And what we should find now is that our Angular Live Development Server is listening on HTTPS localhost 4200. So what we can do is just copy this URL into our clipboard. We can head back to our browser and we can paste this in and press return. Now it may not work straight away. You may need to quit out of Chrome. You may need to restart Chrome. But what you should find is that once you've done that, our connection is secure and our certificate is valid because we trusted it on our computer. What's not so good though is we've lost our list of users. Now why have we lost our list of users? Now's a good opportunity to pause the video and use some of those troubleshooting techniques that we looked at earlier. And when I talk about techniques, we're really talking about gathering information. So open up the console, take a look at the network request that's failing, and see if you can resolve this problem without watching the rest of this video. Because now I'm going to go through what you need to actually solve the problem, and what we need to do is take a look at our console to see what's gone wrong, and we can see we've got some errors. And if we take a look at the errors, then we can see that we're back to our CORS error, and it's telling us that from origin HTTPS has been blocked by CORS. Now when we set up our CORS policy, we were running on HTTP, so we need to make a change to our CORS configuration and tell it that we want to allow HTTPS. So I'm just going to go back to VS Code, and what we want to do is open up our startup.cs file, and we want to specify HTTPS localhost 4200. Then what we can do is head back to our browser, and we should find that we can now refresh our page and everything is back to working again. So we're running over HTTPS, everything's secure, at least locally on our machine. We're not going to be using this certificate in production, so don't worry about that. This is purely for development so that we have a similar experience to what our app is going to be when it is in production. Now the next lesson is the equivalent to do this on Windows, so feel free to skip the next lesson, and what we'll look at after that is saving our changes into source control. So what we're going to look at now is enabling Angular to run over HTTPS. Now it can typically be a bit of a pain to work with self-signed certificates when developing an application. So what we're going to do is just run through how you can get your browser to trust a certificate that I'm providing to make it just easy to set up Angular to use HTTPS. So inside the student assets folder, what you should find is a generate trusted SSL folder. Now this comes with some instructions about what we need to do, but what I've also provided is the server certificate and the server key so that we can simply add this to our Angular configuration. Now there is a shell script and there is some configuration, but you do need to have OpenSSL installed to make use of that script. And these certificates, or the certificate and the key, is valid for 20 years. So it should be long enough to operate, and hopefully you'll have finished the development of this application within that period of time. So what we'll do is we'll make use of this server certificate and this server key, and there's some instructions in here about what we need to do to get our operating system to trust this certificate. So I'm demonstrating this on Windows 10, for example. And what we want to do is just double click on the server CRT file, which is this one, and then click on the button to install a certificate. Then check whether you want to install it on a user level or machine level. I'm just going to say machine level and click next and say yes. And then select place all certificates in the following store. We want to choose the trusted root certificate authorities. So we'll browse and we'll say trusted root certification authorities, click OK, click on next, click on finish, and click on OK. And we're good to go. We've now got a certificate that hopefully is trusted. So what we need to do next is go to VS Code, and what we'll do inside our client folder, we'll create a new folder and we'll call it SSL. And what we'll do is we'll copy the certificate file and the key inside this folder. So I'm just going to open this in the File Explorer and copy the two files and just go and paste them inside the SSL folder. So they're now available. And what we can do then is, or what we need to do then, is we need to tell Angular to actually use these certificates. So what we can do is we can go to our angular.json file, and inside here look for the section, in my case it's on line 65, look for the section saying serve, and we can tell our Angular development server to serve the application over HTTPS. So what we'll do is we'll just specify an SSL key, and we need to point this to the location of the new files that we've added here. So we'll just specify ./SSL, and then this is the key, so we're going to say server.key, and then we need to add SSL cert, and we'll say ./SSL/server.crt, and then we just need to tell Angular to use SSL by default, and we're going to set this to true. Now what we need to do now is simply restart our application. So if you have stopped your application, I've just moved over to a Windows computer, so I'm just going to say .NET Watch run here to start the API server, and I'm going to cd into the client app and say ng serve for the Angular application. And what we should find now is that Angular is going to serve our application over HTTPS. And it has indeed started, and it is indeed serving our application on localhost 4200. So I'm just going to open up Chrome and browse to that location. And we can see that our certificate is not throwing any errors, and we can see that our certificate is valid and our connection is secure. If we click on the certificate, then we can see that this is valid until 2040. Like I say, I really do hope you've managed to complete this course by 2040. So that's valid for plenty of time, and we can see the details and the path, and it's just a local host certificate that's now trusted by our application. But not all is well in the world, and something's gone wrong because we should be seeing our users at this point. And this is a good opportunity for you to test out your new troubleshooting skills. Remember what I said about getting more information about what's happening. There's a couple of tools that we want to use here, the Chrome console and the network tab. So please just pause the video and see if you can solve this particular issue by yourself. Not to worry if you can't, because I'm now going to go through what you'd need to do to solve this particular problem. So if we open up the console, we'll get to see what the issue is with our users and why they're not being displayed. And what we've got here is that cause error once again, and it's telling us that our origin has been blocked. Well, of course, because we've now changed our origin. We're no longer coming from HTTP, we're now coming from HTTPS. So what we need to do is update our cause policy in our startup class so that we accommodate HTTPS. So let's go back to VS Code, and what I'm going to do is just open up the startup.cs class, and we want to make this change and change from HTTP to HTTPS. As simple as that, and make sure our app has restarted. I was using .NET Watch, so my app has restarted automatically. If we go back to the browser, then what we should find when we refresh the page is that we get our users displayed back in our application. We're on HTTPS, everything is good in the world, and this is the setup needed for Windows. So we're all good now. We've got our application set up using the HTTPS protocol for both the API and the client. We've achieved our goal of the walking skeleton, and we've got our end-to-end functionality set up so that we can incrementally add to this as we go and build our full application. So what we'll do is we'll just wrap this up by saving our changes into source control. Now the Angular CLI gave us a git ignore file, and these are cumulative. We've got a git ignore file at the solution level, and we also have a git ignore file at the client app level, and the git ignore file here is respected by our git configuration. We can see that we've got 35 changes, and as I mentioned earlier, we're not saving our node modules folder into source control. So we can take a look at what's in the version control, and all of this I'm okay to send up to GitHub. Now we do have our server certificate and our server key. These are localhost, they're self-signed certificates, they're not security terrible thing to send up, but just because I'm just going to exclude the SSL folder, and we should see those disappear from our source control. Otherwise, I'm quite happy with everything that's going up here. There's no confidential information, by the way, that we store inside a client app, because the client app is designed to be downloaded into somebody's browser. So we don't want to put any sensitive information inside our client's application anyway. Any sensitive information is going to be stored on our backend server in environment variables, and we don't want to put any sensitive information inside our client application. So what we'll do is we'll commit these changes and we'll stage them by clicking the plus button here. We'll give it a commit message and say end of section 3, and then we'll just use the tools here to commit, and then we'll say push to, and we'll push this up to the remote repository. So what we'll do next is we'll wrap up with a short summary. So we've reached the end of section 3, and let's just take a look at our learning goals for this particular project. And the goal of this was to complete our walking skeleton, and we have now done that. But along the way we should now have at least an introductory understanding of using the Angular command line interface and how to create a new Angular app using that. We've taken a look at the main project files involved in an Angular application, and you should have an understanding of how the components and files work together to bootstrap and show our Angular application in a client's browser. Remember, an Angular app needs at least one app module, and that's given to us with the app module.ts, and that's responsible for bootstrapping our root app component, which has at the moment the template that displays the content in the user's browser. We also took a look at using the HTTP client service so that we can fetch data from our API and deliver it to our client's browser, and then we switched our app from running on HTTP over to HTTPS. And also we looked at adding packages using npm. So next up, we're going to take a look at authentication and adding that into our application.